So the story follows this guy, and he's experiencing what life is like where everyone ignores him. He's invisible. Everybody completely ignores him. Even if he tries to get somebody's attention on the street or whatever, just nothing. And it really wears on him, just like it would any of us. Well, I don't remember if his sentence is up or if it's about to be up. It's somewhere near the end of his time. And it's at the end of the episode, and what happens is he reaches his breaking point. And he doesn't go crazy. Instead, he sees another criminal who has evidently been suffering this punishment for a very long time, years and years. This person is older and in rags and just almost crazy, running around trying to get people's attention, trying to get food, anything from anybody, because they have no resources at all. And the episode ends with the main character, who may or may not have gotten out of his own sentence, I don't remember, running up to this other criminal and grabbing him by the shoulders and looking him in the eye and saying, I see you, and giving him what he was so desperate to have when he was serving his sentence. And I think that need for human interaction, but I also think it actually just reflects the even greater need for us to I want to say for us to be seen by God, but really the reality is for us to understand that we are seen and known by God. That's what we see here in Genesis 16. We're going to read the majority of the chapter in Genesis 16, verses 1 through 13. And this is not what you would think of as a standard Mother's Day text, right? There are a couple of mothers present in this passage, Sarai and Hagar. They're both, Sarai will be a mother eventually. Hagar is pregnant. That means she's a mother, but just hasn't given birth yet. But neither of them is exemplary here, not by a long shot. Sarai basically fails at every turn. Hagar, some of each. But we're going to see God, and we're going to see how he interacts with us. So let's look at Genesis chapter 16, starting in verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant, it may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarai said to Abram, May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abram said to Sarai, Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please. Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? She said, I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said to her, Return to your mistress and submit to her. The angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring, so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, You are a God of seeing. For she said, Truly, here I have seen him who looks after me. Now, going back to the beginning of this chapter, there's a problem, right? And ultimately, that problem is because Abram listened to Sarai instead of listening to God. Now, Sarai's problem was that at this point in her life, she apparently did not understand God. She knew God's promise to Abram, and that promise necessarily required her, because that promise was that he would have a son, and she was his wife. But she also knew her circumstances. Look at verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. In writing terms, this verse is simply exposition. These are just facts. These are the background that influence everything else that's going to happen, that give us the context for what we're going to read in the rest of the passage here. This is just the way it was. No commentary, just facts. And Sarai knew these facts as well. In fact, she knew them quite intimately. They were some of the biggest reality in her life. She had no children. And she concluded that God had contradicted himself, something he's incapable of doing, because her understanding did not fit with the reality that she was seeing. So there are two contradicting realities here. Not realities, truths here, or, things. I was trying to avoid the word things because it's bad, but that's what I have to do. There are two contradictions here. On the one hand, she knew God said, I'm going to give you a child. That's what he said to Abram and Sarai. On the other hand, she didn't have a child, and she was getting up there. She was not young. So there's a contradiction. There's a conflict. So she concluded that God had contradicted himself. That was her conclusion. Look at verse 2. And Sarai said to Abram, behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Quick pause. This is true. God had prevented her from having children. The reality was there. Her perception of it was broken. Because what she seems to be saying here is, I will never have children. Not just, I haven't had a baby yet, but I will never have children. This is in complete contrast, absolute contradiction with what God had told her, with what God himself had verbally promised her and her husband. You will have a child. And then she says, well, I'm not going to have a child. So she thinks God has contradicted herself. So moving on in verse 2. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. What's going on here, many of us are familiar with what's happening here. This was a legal or a customary situation in this day where if a woman couldn't have children, first of all, that was about the worst thing in the world. It's still not easy, but then it was perhaps even a bigger deal. And so there was provision for that. So the husband then could take a second wife, and if that second wife was, like in this situation, for example, the servant of the first wife, then any children born to her would actually legally belong to his first wife. So if Hagar had a baby, that baby would be Sarai's baby. That's what's legally going on here. And so Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. Now, this is not an illegal thing. This is according to the custom of their day. It wasn't God's plan. But the point here, the problem was that not only was this not God's plan, this was flying in the face of, this was contradicting God's plan. Because Sarai made this decision, made this suggestion, command really, it seems like, based on a faulty understanding of God's character. Now, there are times in all of our lives when our understanding of God, the way we think through life and God and reality, does not fit with what God is doing or with what God is allowing. And there's a disconnect between those two things. This is what I thought, but this is what God is doing. Now, we've all been there, and we all will continue to be there because our understanding is always going to be flawed until we're in heaven. Even then, it'll be limited. But let me give you an eternal principle that every one of us desperately needs to apply when we're in these situations where here's what I thought and here's what God is doing, and they're not the same thing. When we are in those situations in life, and we all will be, we need to apply this principle. Your understanding is wrong. It's real simple, but it's not easy, and it's not comfortable, but it doesn't matter how hard it is to believe. When my understanding of who God is in conflict with what God is doing, It is my understanding, not God's actions, that are wrong. This is so important, guys. We can never say, well, God must not be what he said he was because I don't see it. That is absurd. That is like an ant saying, maybe you've heard this illustration. It's like an ant saying to his group of followers, if there really is a human, he should step on me right now to prove he's there. Does any human, one, hear that, or two, care? No. That's just like saying, well, God doesn't fit my perception of him, so I must be right. No, we're nothing. We're nothing. My understanding is always going to be wrong when it is in conflict with God's actions. Now, I don't want to spend too much time here because Sarai's problem and the way that she faces conflict by redefining who God is, this is not the point of the passage. This is not the point of the sermon. And looking from thousands of years away, we can say, you're dumb. But I'm telling you, we do the same thing all the time. Now, this will come back up later in the sermon, but it's not the point. So let's move on. Because Abram's problem was that he listened to Sarai's sin. And I chose each of those words specifically. Abram's problem was that he listened to Sarai's sin. Look at verse 3. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. Abram said yes. And notice that I didn't say the problem was that he listened to his wife. That's probably a joke that people would make in this situation, but frankly, it's offensive. I'm not going to do that. I hate that. Besides which, it's not even close to true, right? I mean, if you're married, if you're a guy here and you're married, and you're honest, if you're even mostly honest, you know your wife has solved more problems for you than she has caused, right? I mean, seriously. Let me give you an illustration. In a class I just finished, it was a very atypical class. And when I came to class the first day, I had to have the final exam complete and turned in. And everything that you're questioning right now is real. That's what happened. Okay, I had the final exam ahead of time, and I had to complete it and turn it in before the first day of class. And during that first class period, we discussed it. And there's lots of reasons for that, and actually it was a really good idea and worked out really well. But one of the aspects of that test was that I had to evaluate myself and my love. I had to evaluate my own love, the way how good am I at loving, right? And the whole thing was like 170, 180 points, and every positive point I had on my own love evaluation was counted toward my total. To get an A on the exam, I had to have, I think, 140 points, something like that. So I had to get a lot. There was a lot of leeway. The thing was, at the end of the exam, the professor had in there, he said, now, if you still need some more points, evaluate your wife on the love scale and add her score to your total. He said, this won't be, because this is in seminary, he said, this won't be the last time your wife has bailed you out of a problem in ministry. And guys, it's true, right? We need our wives. We need them. Anyway, that's a big diversion, or big excursus. No, the real problem was not that Abram listened to his wife. That is not the problem. It's not even a funny joke. The problem is that he listened to her advice that was based on sin. It was based on pride. I think I understand God better than he does. Here's how we fix this problem, and he listened to it. He listened to the sin. In other words, he failed to lead his family by protecting his wife from her own sin. Pardon me. He caved in. He caved into the pressure instead of standing strong, doing what was right even though it was unpopular, and suffering ensued. And is still going on today. In other words, Abram listened to Sarai's sin, and it didn't go well. As a generational understatement, first of all, Sarai blamed Abram for the consequences. This is yet another win for Sarai in this passage. That's sarcasm. I'm really glad we have more about Sarai later in Scripture because she turns out pretty good. This passage, not so much. So now what's going on? Abram's got 2 wives now. And unfortunately for him, the second one, Hagar, proves to be just as proud as the first one. Look at verse 4. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And so far, fine. Okay, this is according to plan. Bad plan, but a plan. And when she saw that she had conceived, here's the problem, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Now, obviously, Hagar had a pretty active role in this pregnancy, right? Kind of. Physically, yes. But authoritationally, she had no say in this, right? Her mistress said, you're now his wife, so I have authority over you. Now I'm putting you under his authority. Have a baby. What did she do to be proud of? This was not her doing. She didn't make this choice whatsoever. But yet she's proud of it. So that's the problem, right? He has 2 wives who are both proud, and they make choices based on their arrogance. But now it gets worse, because his first wife, who we already know is quite proud, she proves to be as irrational as she is proud. Look at verse 5. And Sarai said to Abram, may the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, like she had been generous here. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. So I'm blaming you for her being stupid. That's what she's saying. May the Lord judge between you and me. I could spend a lot of time on that phrase, boy, because Sarai did not want this. That's what she says, but she had a whole lot of wrong going on. Everybody here did. She did not. That was another bad call by Sarai to call Lord's judgment on herself. That was bad. He mercifully did not. But Sarai's not done. She's going to hit for the cycle here. She's going to have a grand slam of sin, because she's going to prove to be just as vengeful as she is irrational and proud. Verse 6. But Abram said to Sarai, behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please. Side note, more sin by Abram, more weakness, more saying you have your way instead of no, do right. Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. So Sarai attacked Hagar for the consequences that were forced onto Hagar, and probably attacked her physically. Could have been just verbal. Whatever it was bad. Just like everything else in this situation. Bad all around. Start to finish, top to bottom, it was all bad. No one came off better because of what's going on here. And this might go without saying, but that's what sin does. If you take a bad situation and you try to fix it with sin, you've just made it into a much, much worse situation. Every single time. Absolute guarantee. The wrath of man never accomplishes the righteousness of God. James said that in James 1:20. The anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. That's like saying, I don't know, gasoline does not produce a doused fire, right? When you try to stop a bad situation by adding sin to it, you are trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It never works. It always, only, ever makes things worse. Guaranteed, take it to the bank. But now we're going to see a shift in this story. We're going to see something new. Something we haven't seen yet so far, and that is good. Because everything we've seen so far in the story is bad, right? But this is fascinating to me. Hagar listens to God instead of to Sarai. She does the opposite of what Abram did and brings the only good into the situation. Now, the angel of the Lord shows up to ask what's going on. And as we read through this a minute ago, did this jump out to you as being a little bit abrupt? Right? So there's this going on, then this said this, and this happened. And we know there's some time jumps here. But now there's a jump here where Hagar is on the run now. She left. We're going to see here in verse 7, she's on her way back to Egypt. That's on the way to Shur. That's where she's going. She's going back home to Egypt. But we see there's no preamble. There's no introduction. Just all of a sudden, the second person of the Godhead, Jesus himself, found her. That's it. No, nothing. It's Talk about understatement. This is a huge deal. Let's look at verses 7 and 8. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said to her, this is pretty low key, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? She said, I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai. They might as well have been like, hey, what do you think of that weather today? Yeah, that's weather. But they're so blasé about this. This is huge stuff. This is the second person of the Godhead, Jesus himself. This does not make any sense, right? Sarai is out in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. She is on the road. She's traveling. She's pregnant. She is at very least emotionally hurt. Very, very likely she's physically been abused. Her life is in shambles. I mean, think about this. This is probably the worst day of her life, right? This is the worst situation she's been in. This is bad news bears. This is what she's experiencing. And I think what's really happening here is this is so bad and so traumatizing to her, the situation she's in, that it doesn't strike her as odd that a dude shows up out of nowhere and says, hey, I know your name and I know your job, but hey, what you doing? Right? And she's like, oh, I'm running away. Which is another thing that you don't say if you're a runaway servant. I'm leaving. I'm not supposed to, but that's what I'm doing. This whole thing doesn't make sense unless you put it in the context of the harrowing situation that she is in. But then it just keeps not making sense. Verse 9, the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. This is not what you expect, right? Sarai is doing the only thing she knows to do, the only thing she can think of doing to give herself some relief from this horrible situation she's in. And this guy shows up who happens to know a lot about her and says, you should probably go back. Not probably, you should go back. That's the right thing for you to do right now. In fact, that's what he's telling her. Do the next right thing. The next right thing for you and me could seem like really boring, simple stuff. Like, you're telling me, God, that what I have to do today is just go back to work? You're telling me right now that I have to actually get up and do laundry or make lunch? These are boring things. Why do these things matter? My life is in shambles. Why do I have to worry about this dumb little stuff? Because it's the next right thing to do. Or, like Sarai, the next right thing to do might be excruciatingly difficult and the last thing you want to do. And maybe that's get up and go back to work. Maybe it's go talk to your family member or neighbor or friend or whatever. Maybe you have to confront them. Maybe you have to confess to them. But whatever the next right thing is, one, God tells you what it is. That's what he did here for Sarah or for Hagar, and that's what he does for us. If we will listen to God through his word and be open and honest, he will tell us the next right thing to do. That's what he does. And then we have to do it. Doing the next right thing, simple or hard, is the only way to get to where God wants you to be eventually. It is always the next step on God's path to holiness for you. It might be easy, it might be hard, it might be simple, it might be complex. But the next right thing is always the next step on God's path for you to holiness. For Hagar, it was return to Sarai and submit to her. This is a heart command, not just a do this thing. Do this in your heart. That's how God commands us. Do the next right thing with your actions and in your heart. But Jesus never leaves us there, does he? He never leaves it at, you have to do a hard thing, and then folds his arm and watches and taps his foot. He never leaves us there, and he didn't leave Hagar there either. He gives her long-term hope. He doesn't just say, here's the next step of your path. He said, and this is where it will end. That's what he gives us. It will end when we are with Christ, when we are fully like him to the degree that we can be. For Hagar, he tells her his plan in simple terms. Verse 10. The angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. Think about this. She is pregnant. She's on the run. Listen, moms, if you're pregnant and you are being abused, what is your first thought? Not, ow, that hurts. It's, don't hurt my baby. Don't hit me because you'll hurt my baby. Will this stress hurt my baby? That's your thought as a mother. And so she is running. She is so desperate that she's willing to be alone and pregnant in the wilderness. That is better for her and her baby than to be with Sarai. That's where she's at. But then God himself says to her, I'm going to multiply your offspring. When he said offspring, she thought of her baby, and he said, and they. He just assumes. He just knows. He treats her child out like a nation because that's what he will become. This is already done in his mind. This is him promising her future, hope. And I don't know why. Maybe she was slow on the uptake because of everything that was going on in her mind. Maybe she argued with him. Maybe he just wanted to tell her more. He gives her this full prophecy in verses 11 and 12. And he gives a reason for this prophecy in verse 11. At the end of verse 11, so it's right in the middle of this prophetic statement, he gives her the reason, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. Another way to translate that is he's listened to your plea. This active plea that Hagar apparently made at some point prior to this to God for help. Now what he's saying here is, name your son Ishmael because the Lord heard you, because Ishmael literally means God hears, right? But why that name? Why does that matter? To commemorate the fact that God hears. So every time she thought of or looked at her baby, which if you're a mom, you're like, that's pretty often, right? She is reminded, God hears, and he heard me. It's easy to think of Ishmael and think, what a horrible guy, and he was. But his name means, God hears me. That is powerful. And it commemorates the fact that God heard Hagar, a downtrodden, alone, unknown Egyptian servant living not even in her own country, hated by her master, her mistress. Hagar had hope for her own future and for the future of her baby because God heard her plea. That makes doing the next right thing a lot easier, doesn't it? Go back to Sarai, submit to her from your heart, but I promise you the baby's going to be more than fine. He's going to be a nation. And I think at that moment, Hagar understood God far better than Sarai did at this point. Look at verse 13. So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, you are a God of seeing. For she said, truly here I have seen, not just him, I have seen him who looks after me. This is a massive statement. Remember how alone she was. She was alone and pregnant. She couldn't go to the people who had taken care of her for at least a decade. She was going back to a people who hadn't seen her for at least a decade. She's alone. But God looks after her. Now, this is one spot in the ESV where I don't super love it, because that first phrase there, you are a God of seeing, is very impersonal. There are a lot of other translations that indicate a more personal wording here, where she said, you are the God who sees me, or maybe literally, you, God, see me. You, eternal and almighty one, see me. This tiny little speck of dust out in the wilderness. But you see me. Certainly God is the God of seeing. That is utterly true. But the idea that is communicated here is that God saw Hagar and her suffering and her misery and her fear. And he is the God who sees you. in your questioning, in your suffering, in your happiness, in your joy, in your uncertainty, in your pain, in your loneliness. He is the God who sees you where you are, and he understands. It doesn't matter what's in your heart that you would never admit to anybody else, or there's nobody else to tell. God sees you, and he understands you, and he knows where you are. Let me illustrate this with a situation in my life where I wish I had had this thought in my head. I wish I understood this better than I did at the time. You know, we have 3 kids. Sam is our oldest. He's 14 now and enormous. And he's a good kid. He's happy. He's a good kid. When he was a baby, he was not happy. And that's how one of his caretakers described him. They said, and being very kind and sweet, said, Sam he doesn't enjoy being a baby. And even if you know Sam even to this day, he doesn't. He's always wanted to be an adult, I think. But especially as a baby, he just wasn't a happy baby. And it wasn't because he was an unhappy person. It was because he had a lot of pain. Early on, he had a lot of reflux that we didn't even know about for a while, so he was just in pain a lot, so we cried. He has lots of skin issues, which we've been under control for quite some time, but we didn't have him under control when he was an infant because we didn't know what was going on. We're still trying to figure it out. So his face especially was in pain a lot. It was really dry and horrible. It doesn't matter. It was bad. He was in a lot of pain in his early life. And as is often the case with any human, being in a lot of pain stops you from sleeping. So we initially thought he just didn't sleep well because, he was 2 months old or 7 months old or whatever, he's a baby. But the reality was that he was in a lot of pain. And that changes anything. He still wasn't asleep. And Becky and I we took shifts. We spent, I'm not exaggerating this, hours, some nights, multiple hours on end, walking around with Sam, trying to get him to go to sleep and then stay asleep, not in our arms, so we could sleep too. And we had to, it was bad. So he had to be held, first of all. We couldn't just pat him. We tried that. We tried everything. You know how it is. We tried patting him, whatever, didn't matter. So he had to be held. Not only did he have to be held, he had to be walked. We had to be standing up. He could tell. I'll never understand that. But we had to be standing up, and usually we had to be walking and bouncing like this, right? And that's not too bad. He was 10 pounds, 12 pounds. That's, it's not too bad for the first hour. But even that didn't last. Sometimes he had to be in his car seat and be swung back and forth. But, it was good because the car seat was modern, only weighed 7,000 pounds, so it wasn't too bad. My right shoulder was huge. Sometimes, and this was worst case scenario, sometimes the bouncing didn't cut it. We had to do straight up lunges. So this is what we had to do. Carrying him like this, right? We're like that for hours. I'm not exaggerating this. But here's the deal. It's funny now. It was not funny then. And so we're doing this literally, sometimes it felt like all night long. It was in the middle of the night. Everything is dark. We would go downstairs in the hallway. That was the simplest, straightest run we could walk. And we were alone. Right? Becky, when she was doing this, she was alone. So palpably alone. Sam was no help, right? He was the problem. It was dark. Everybody else was asleep. The house was silent. You couldn't call anybody on the phone because they were all asleep. All the neighbors were asleep. It felt like the universe was asleep except Sam. And so Becky was bouncing him around, singing songs about the Lord, singing He is able, more to herself than to Sam. We felt alone. Even when we were both up, we felt alone. What do? We have no idea what to do. How are we going to get through this? It was awful. And I wish I had understood better At that moment, God saw us. He saw Becky walking around utterly exhausted, near to or in tears, carrying her baby alone. But God saw her, and he understood, and he was with her, even if no one else was. And the moments when you are alone, when you feel like you're in the wilderness like Sarai was, when you can't possibly imagine that anyone else can see you or understand you or is paying any attention to you, God sees you. And he hears you. And he understands. And he always has. He's always been there. And because he always has, you can know he always will be. So don't redefine God because your understanding of him doesn't fit with what he's doing. That's to reject his help, the only help you have available to you. Don't make that choice like Sarai did. Don't be proud and push God away. That choice can only lead to more pain, more separation, more alone. Trust God. Trust what he said about himself. Trust that he can and does see you and hear you and understand you. And when you do the next right thing, he will eventually get you to the place of promise, the place of rescue, the rescue that he determines in his time. Not our choice, not the way we want to be rescued, and not the time we want to be rescued in necessarily, but the right way. Every step of the next right thing that is suffering or that is difficult or that is meaningless to you, but is the next right thing, is a step on God's path for you to holiness. And therefore, it's the only right thing to do. I think of it like this. Let me give you one more illustration. I worked at the dining common at Bob Jones, and one of the responsibilities of my department was to deliver food at lunchtime during the school year to 3 or 4 other locations around the campus. One of those locations was the middle school. I may have told this story here before, but you probably don't remember it, so it's okay. One of the locations I delivered to was the middle school. And that was when I was working with youth group in my church, and some of the kids from my youth group went to the school, the middle school at Bob Jones. There's one girl in particular who was really quiet, but we knew her family well, and just working with the teens, I knew her, and I knew that her character was of value. She's a special girl. She had her character had great value, and she was a benefit to anyone who actually took the time to know her. But most people didn't. She was quiet. She wasn't real popular at school because she was quiet. She wasn't, she didn't play sports, whatever. It didn't matter. Not a lot of people knew her even at school. And one time when I was there, I was delivering food, I looked up, and the lockers for the middle school were in the back of the lunchroom, at least some of them. So I saw her go to her locker, get her books, and go back out. And she does her thing. Like, she walks in, she gets her books, closes her locker, walks out. Well, there's this melee all around her because it's middle school, and that's what middle school is. It's melee. So all these kids are running, zooming all around her, and like they're bumping into her and paying her no attention. And I'm watching this thinking, they have no idea what they're missing and who they're ignoring. And she looked, I don't know if she felt this way. I know at times she did in middle school feel this way. She looked utterly alone, just completely packed in this like sardines, this horde of middle schoolers, probably stinky, running around, but she just looked so alone. And she didn't look up at me and I waved, and nothing like dramatic TV like that. But that's how I envision sometimes when you've experienced this. I'm sure you have. I have. Where you're in the middle of a crowd of people, but you are just utterly alone. Nobody knows what's going on in your heart. Nobody knows what you're suffering, what you're feeling, what you're wondering, what your anguish is. You're alone, even though you're surrounded by people. And I envision in those moments, like I saw that girl, and I saw her, and I understood a little bit better than the people around her. To an infinitely greater degree, when we're in a horde of people, none of them understand what you're suffering, or what you're worrying about, or what you're thinking. Jesus is looking at you. And he's making eye contact with you. And he understands. He knows what you're thinking, even if you don't want to think about it. He gets it. Jesus always sees you. He always hears you. He always understands you. And moms, that's true for you too. It's true for you every day. It's true for you every night. When your baby is smiling or when your baby is screaming, when your teenager is sulking or when your teenager is hugging you, God sees you. And he knows, he understands what is in your heart. He gets it. He gets you. Better than we even understand ourselves. He looks on you with eternal and unbridled compassion and gentleness and everything else you need. God sees you. And so our response must be to do the next right thing. Do what he tells us to do. That is the next step on our path to holiness. That is our next step on the path to promise. Just like it was for Sarai. Our promises are different, but our promises are better. We'll be like Jesus when we are with him. He will use us to glorify himself by showing him Jesus through our lives to other people. That's mind-blowing. And all it takes is do the next right thing because God sees you. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, thank you that you sent Jesus to Sarai. Thank you that you sent Jesus to us to die on the cross, to take our sin on yourself. And thank you that you rose again and are now alive and utterly, passionately concerned with us. Thank you that you see us and you hear us and you understand us, even when no one else does, even when everyone else does not. Lord, please help us to trust who you say you are and to do the next right thing because of who you are. Because you see us and you know, you understand where we are, and so the next right thing that you tell us to do is the next right thing. Please help us to obey you and so magnify you. Praise your name in our lives, please. Help us to live today like we have been in your presence, to live your life. Rather, you live our lives for us this week so that you can be praised. In your name we ask these things. Amen. A couple of things quickly before we're done here. First of all, some of you weren't at the 10:15 meeting earlier today. We had a quick business meeting to vote on whether we should fund the Loop, the workplace, and that passed. So we are allocating $800 into the 2021 budget to pay for workplace for the rest of the year. So we're continuing with that. That is a done deal now. Also, in 2 weeks, we're currently planning, excuse me, my family and I will be on vacation, and so the current plan is for Andy Burrow to be here and preach for us in a couple of weeks. Now, he's not in great health right now, and I didn't get a chance to get the latest from Tricia this morning, although I want to check with you afterwards. But keep praying for his health. He's not been in good health, and pray for him anyway, but also pray for him so he can be here in a couple of weeks to preach to us. It's the downside of having guest speakers when I'm gone, is I don't get to hear him. But Andy's a great guy, Pastor Burrow, whatever you want to call him. We've probably almost all heard him speak at one point or another. So be here for that. And then I want to say, first of all, did anybody notice the change in this room? What is it? Tell me to speak up. It's okay. Yeah. Sound, lights, yeah, we made some big changes in here. The lights on the sides have all been switched out to a much brighter LED, also a silent LED, which is just spectacular. So that's a big praise. Praise God for that. Our AV is mostly working right now. We got a big thumbs up. So we're learning on that. We're still in a little bit of a learning stage. We've been working on it for the last couple of weeks, but we are in an improved state, so that's exciting. Moving forward. But you know how it is. If you've ever done any projects of any scale, particularly on a home or a building, you know that there's a lot of before there's a woo, right? And right now we have some woo up in here with our new piano and our lights and our AV. But if you've been downstairs yet, that's still in the stage. Something that Steve and Jan can attest to, right? They understand. So just bear with us. We're just in process on a lot of things. So if you think, whoa, this looks really messy down here. Yeah, I know. We're working on it. We keep moving forward. Keep praying for our projects. Keep moving forward. And then the last thing, Frank and Ursula you guys, I told you to come forward, but don't worry about that today. We'll do that next week. Frank and Ursula have completed membership training as required in our bylaws. They will meet with me and the deacons, which is also required in the bylaws, to just share their testimony of faith, and they will sign a simple document just saying that they agree to and support our statement of faith and our covenant. In short, they want to join, and they're ready to join. They've done everything asked of them so far. A couple of small things this week, and I'm telling you this now because next Sunday morning we'll vote on them. So at that point, if the congregation votes for them, they will become official part of our family, which we're very excited about. Just so you know, in the morning service, in the 9 o'clock service, Mike and Alyssa Kurz are in the same situation, so we'll vote on them next week as well. We have some people wanting to join our family who are already becoming integrated. And then actually, also next week, we'll also vote on Glenn. You're like, Glenn, he's been here his whole life. Yes, he has. And now he's over 18, and he's completed the necessary training and so forth. And so we'll vote on him as well. Pardon me. To vote on whether he should be a full member also. So God is adding to our body the right way, and it's a big blessing. So that's what we'll do next week. This week, pretty normal week. So look forward to seeing you guys on Wednesday night, either in person or on Zoom. Love you all. Have a happy Mother's Day. If you haven't talked to your mom yet today, do that. She wants to hear from you, I promise. Love you all. Have a good week.